What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Episode 43 of the Fights Gone By podcast. It's your boy, the turd on the mat of MMA media, Jack Slack, and we're coming at you on Monday evening, Monday the 26th of June. Couple of good events this weekend. Not much news, so I'm going to go straight into the events. Bellator's tent house, P.T. Barnum-esque circus event was in-house. Silva versus Sonnen, Fedor versus Mitrione. Bellator New York, that's what they were calling it. Bellator NYC, that's what they were tweeting out the hashtags of. And I'll be honest, I enjoyed it. Not for... Well, I'm going to be honest, there were a lot of things that they couldn't have foreseen on this card. If you haven't seen it, maybe watch it before listening to this podcast, because it's worth catching up on. There was some interesting stuff on it. We'll start with the top two, because they were the most predictable fights. Remember last week when I said Chael Sonnen probably going to lay on him for 3 rounds? Exactly what happened. Yep, Vandy came out, stood in his square, ready to windmill stance. Sonnen immediately ducked under and drove through for the takedown. And the first round was vintage Sonnen, and that's the Sonnen I really enjoy. Sonnen has never been a finisher. He really struggles to actually finish guys on the mat. Doesn't really submit guys all that often. Doesn't really have the power to, certainly doesn't land clean often enough to really stop guys with punches. But what he really does well in his best fights, so when I'm saying this, I'm thinking of Nate Marquardt and the first Silva fight as like the best of Chael Sonnen in my opinion. He just puts a pace on guys that's absolutely relentless. And it's not like he's just, he's out-techniquing them. It's that he's standing up over them and just dropping bombs. And throwing all kinds of, like, short, crappy punches from like, an inch or two away from their head, but just keeps going at it. There's never a break for a Chael Sonnen opponent, which is... when he's at his best, but that was only the first round of this one, because he's 40 years old, and they were basically clean, actually. They were doing some testing. Not the level of UFC testing, but still some testing. You gotta think Bellator had to put something in the contract to protect themselves with this fight. You got Vanderlei Silva ran from a drug test, you got Chael Sonnen, prolific drug cheat. There was all kinds of... I was saying that I give this like a 90% chance of this fight and either this or Mitrione and Fedor getting changed before it happened. So they did a good job of keeping everyone on their best behaviour and no one getting injured and no one getting subbed out for roid use. Vandy landed a couple of good punches when they got back to the feet. Chael's chin did not seem particularly solid. But I like what Chael was doing on the feet. He's just doing that same Chael thing where he throws out the goofy lead leg kick, falls into the left hand and runs into the takedown, or throws out the goofy left kick, waits for the return and ducks under. If you haven't seen the clip from The Ultimate Fighter, they kept referencing it in the build-up material, which was super weird because they weren't allowed to show it. Because obviously, why would the UFC give them access to the footage to sell their fight? But if you saw the scuffle on The Ultimate Fighter, basically, Chael's like, can't let you near me, and then shoves Vandy, and Vandy goes to swing at him and he ducks under. The Gracies have been teaching this stuff in their self-defense curriculum. If you shove a guy, he'll immediately shove you back. On that shove back, you tap the elbows up as you duck low, and you take him down. And what you saw in this fight was just the application of that, but with fists or kicks. It was, I'm throwing punches at you, I know you'll throw punches back, and I'll duck under and take you down. It's exactly the same as the Roberto Duran bait with the jab. You flick out the jab, you know something's coming back, so you flick out the jab and immediately start moving to where you want to start counter-punching from. If they don't punch back, great, just jab again. Some of Chael's ground game on display from the top, which was quite nice. He does some weird things, because he's not like a... Well, he worked a lot with Neil Melanson, so he does a lot of cradles and stuff. If you saw the stand fight, I don't think that's on Fight Pass, because I've looked for it several times. But or it might be as part of the full event or something like that. But I wanted to check it because he does these side switches, which are very strange. He does some cradles and side switches on Stan, and eventually catches him in an arm triangle. But it was nothing like the jiu-jitsu that you'd usually see. It was very Melanson-y stuff. In this fight, he used the Kimura to pass half, which is always a good idea. You're not going to finish a Kimura from half guard typically anymore. I mean, the thing about Kimuras is the space where you want to push their arm to get the damage done is underneath their back, which is, against the mat. So a lot of guys will use the Kimura as a way to keep the other guy flat. If you can take that hand away from their body, put it on the mat, you can start inserting the knee or the shin or whatever and trying to like backstep pass, because they're not really going to turn up into you because you'll be able to rip their shoulder off. Paulo Filho did a great series of passes with the Kimura. I've seen Roger Gracie do it. There's a few guys done it in the past, but it's a really useful position and hold, the Kimura, as opposed to submission. Most of the time you see it nowadays, it's more that double wrist lock. It's more like an arm position for control rather than a submission attempt. But the other thing that Chael did was he pushed Wanderlei Silva's knees down away from him from side control and then tried to step over them, which was really strange because typically if you push a guy's knees over there and you step towards them, you're basically giving him quarter guard, which is what I seem to remember happened, or he might have got pushed back to guard, but he definitely didn't get mount. So that was a bit weird. What I do love about Chael's game is when he gets on the bottom, he always gets on top again immediately afterwards, but his sweeps are literally sitting up and going for the double leg, and he can do it from like closed guard. It's the weirdest thing to watch, but obviously that's just a lifetime of completing doubles. I will say, what the fuck is Bellator doing with 3-round main events in 2017? Interesting fact, whatever. Bellator's 2 pay-per-views, the first one was absolute dreck. This one was pretty good. But both of them have been headlined by a 3-round main event, which is so strange. The first one was Rampage versus King Mo, which was dog shit, but and then this one was the main event here. And then they had Fedor versus Mitrione as the co-main event, which was just depressing. I was listening to my podcast, just trying to remember what I said about it before coming into this. And I did say that I was, not really looking forward to it. Don't want to see Fedor laid out again. I said the things that I'd like to see Mitrione do, and then I said, but he could probably lay him out just by trading with him. Didn't know that he would literally trade with him and lay him out like that. Literal trade of right hands. And you see these so much more in MMA than in boxing. And I think it's just because the punching form gets very sloppy. Guys drop one hand as they throw the other. Both these guys through their right hand. Mitrione's a southpaw. He does that leaping right hook. It was the same one he got Derek Lewis with. Fedor obviously does the ducking right hand all the time. And both of them dropped their left hand and they both got knocked down by it. But Mitrione came up first and just pounded Fedor stiff, basically, which was really depressing to watch. People will be like, well, if that had been slightly different, Fedor would have come up first and Mitrione would have been done. But Fedor has all those miles on the clock, and you just don't want to see him fighting anymore. Don't have anything more to say about Fedor. An all-time great. I'm hoping to fit him into the new project that I'm working on, book-wise. What he did won't be done again, and he was incredible, but we need to, accept that our heroes aren't going to be amazing forever. At some point, they are just an old man getting punched. Which is really what I would say to a lot of the hardcore Bellator fans. A lot of them are just guys who want to watch their old favourites after the period where their old favourites can actually compete, in a decent level. Then there were the 2 title fights, and those were quite underwhelming, actually. It was... Well, we got Phil Davis and Ryan Bader doing their herky-jerky striking again. Both guys with all the potential in the world, but no real killer instinct, either of them. Both a bit timid. I don't know why Phil Davis is. He's never been shown to be chinny, but obviously Bader does have chin issues, or has had chin issues in the past. You need to be able to bring a threat on your feet, and you need to be able to be a convincing threat on your feet. If you're a wrestler, so many people. Well, we watched the Bader versus Johnson fight. If Bader had come out there swinging, people would be like, "Why didn't Bader just jump on the takedown right away and use his strength?" But as it was, he just dived on the takedown and immediately got knocked out. If you don't have other threats, you are telling the guy you're going to do the one thing, and he can do everything he wants to stop you. You have to have those other aspects to your game, and be willing to throw them, even if you might get hit. But anyway, not much to say about that fight. It wasn't very entertaining. Went on for 5 rounds. And then the other title fight was Lawrence Larkin versus Douglas Lima. I was really looking forward to this one. This was my favourite fight on the card. Actually, no, my favourite fight on the card ahead of time was Machida versus Gallagher, because I wrote about it ahead of time. But Lima versus Larkin was my pick for like a high-level fight, best one on the card. Both top-flight welterweights. And Lima, really, looking at it in the aftermath of this fight, he has been such a company guy for Bellator. He's been there forever. He knocked out Ben Saunders twice. Ben Saunders is now in the UFC. Beaten pretty much everyone they put in front of him except Ben Askren, who's now in ONE FC, wasting his talent there. And Koreshkov, and he avenged that Koreshkov loss with a really convincing victory in his most recent fight before this. And then he boxed up Paul Daly too. He's got this great left hook, lovely and tight, and obviously Daly is famed for his left hook, but Lima was just timing him. He'd wait for Daly to square up, and he'd immediately clip him with the left hook before Daly could even launch his. Very impressive. Weird thing Larkin was doing in this fight was like the cross hand trap thing, but like as a check. His left hand was going all the way over his body, across his body, onto Lima's left hand. Like guarding yourself with the wrist and forearm. Bernard Hopkins did this a lot in the end of his career. Vladimir Klitschko was showing it against Anthony Joshua. It's where you basically take out the opponent's left hand with your left hand, wrist and forearm, and you've got your right shoulder to protect you from their right hand. And to be fair to it, while he was doing it, Lima wasn't throwing his left hand. He was throwing these clumsy overhands. He doesn't have a very sharp right hand. It takes, he winds it up, and Larkin could see it coming miles off. The times that he did get hit by the left hook were when Larkin stepped in to attack. Then his hand came off Lima's left hand, and Lima clipped him with the left hook, put him down. I think that was in the second round. Wasn't an action-packed fight. A stat came up in like the 4th round saying that they'd landed 20 out of 100 and something strikes each. But sometimes that happens when you get really high-level guys against each other. You were watching it and you were saying these guys are looking for openings. They're just not finding them, and obviously each considers the other guy very dangerous. Actually, something I thought I would see Larkin looking for off that like cross-hand check was drawing the right hand and trying to land his left kick under the ribs, because he has a really sharp left kick, and he's really good with that from both stances. Did use it to draw a right hand and pivot off the cage a couple of times, which he did against Tumenov too, Albert Tumenov. Tumenov? Einstein, the boxer, the guy with the wicked body shots. Then there was the weird fight between Michael Chandler and his opponent, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was basically like supposed to be a showcase fight. This guy had like 8 wins or something like that. But when he got in there, I was like, Jesus, that guy's gigantic for a lightweight. He was nearly 6 foot or something like that, and just seemed a really big dude for the weight class. Because Michael Chandler is a big lightweight, and he was smaller. So, think about how much Michael Chandler dwarfed Eddie Alvarez when they fought. But this fight was it was bad because Michael Chandler lost the title without really even taking a punch, and Bellator's lightweight superstar has an embarrassing loss on his record. But if you saw the fight, it was actually a real testament to Chandler's grit. No strike hurt him in this fight. The guy throws a low kick or a high kick at him, I think it was, and Chandler retracts the lead leg, maybe think it was a low kick or something like that, puts it down behind him and twists his ankle as he does it. And then the rest of the fight is just him trying to shake that leg out and then it rolling as he stands on it and him tripping over himself again. And if you know anything about hitting hard, you have to transfer your body weight. You have to move from your right leg to your left to your right. There has to be a transfer of weight to generate power or to generate torque in the hips and shoulders. if you punt a guy in the leg a lot, with good low kicks, and he's limping, he's going to really struggle to hit as hard as he did. But Chandler's basically on one leg, and he lamps this guy, puts him starts him towards a TKO, runs in and just falls over his own ankle again. It was really endearing performance for Chandler. He's so much better than a lot of the guys he fights just outright. It was great to see him work at such a disadvantage and not at any point sort of lose concentration or will to win. He could have at any point taken a knee and gone, okay, can't do this anymore. Or he could have done the Caleb stance and just tried to run. But no, he was like, I'll try and get this guy out of here right now. And then the dickhead commission member in the corner, he stands up off the stool to say, what? No, don't stop the fight. And the commission guy removes the stool as the doctor says, no, it's over. And Chandler sits down and bonks his head on the cage. Oh, it was so bad. But then we know that the New York Athletic Commission is shit. They always have been. I was desperate to get MMA into New York, and now I sort of regret it. The standout performer of the night for me was James Gallagher. Anytime Scott Coker says someone's a prospect, I go, okay, show me him fighting someone decent. And this, I talked about this last week. This was my big article last week. I just talked about how excited I was for this fight, how interestingly they matched up. Gallagher throws a lot of naked right low kicks. His striking has always been very sort of like, I'm trying this. And he'll, hammer one idea into the ground. And I thought if he does that against Machida, a nice naked right low kick against a Machida brother is going to get you a right straight up the bracket, basically. But he actually came out and looked perfect. His game plan for this fight was phenomenal. If you didn't already know that John Kavanagh's a smart man, and Owen Roddy and whoever else is working with him, they're a smart crew down there. They really did their homework. And exactly what I was asking for in the article and in the podcast last week. Feints, pressure, moved Machida to the fence right off the bat without throwing a strike, just by feinting and constantly moving. He did some audible feints. Where's my man Izzy? He was asking about audible feints last week. He did some audible feints, but he kept Machida backing up onto the fence. Machida kept picking up a leg to kick, but then changing his mind and putting it down because the fence was right behind him. And with the fence behind Machida, that meant that Gallagher could start closing that space. The Machidas like a lot of distance, because if you've got that distance, the guy will start taking extra steps. He'll start running to catch you. He'll think you're going to move away anyway, so he'll start doing double steps to try and make the distance. And that's when you can get him running onto punches. By putting Machida's back to the fence, or back foot to the fence, Gallagher could close the distance on him and have him fight a more comfortable striking distance, or a more traditional striking distance. And a grappling distance, obviously. Wrestling distance. His first shot was a bit of a panic shot. Chinzo shook it off, but then he immediately moved him back to the cage again. Chinzo lashed out with a punch. And, Chinzo and Lyoto are not guys who step in a hurry. They really measure themselves between strikes. When they do rush, like the time Shogun knocked Machida out, he'd hit him with a beautiful... Machida had hit Shogun with a beautiful knee in the body and then decided to hang around in the pocket and throw another left straight. It's when they're really at their best when they're saying, okay, I'll engage now and then I'll wait a minute and a half or something like that between. But yeah, so Machida lashes out at him with I think it was a left straight or a right straight, and Gallagher counters him with the right straight, which was really nice. And then Machida throws the front kick, and we were talking about this last week in the podcast. I forgot to mention it in my article, but it's a really big point. Parrying front kicks, really great way to get in on takedowns because you knock the guy's feet offline. We talked about John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. We talked about Buakar, actually. But he did that. He knocked his feet offline, dove in on the shot, took him down, got his back, choked him out. Easy peasy. Certainly made it look easy. I don't think it was, but really brilliant execution of the game plan, because he's been the kind of guy who's got skill, and he's got this skill, and he's been matched against guys who aren't going to test him. So you haven't seen him have to fight to a game plan. This was the first time I saw him fight to a really strict game plan where he would have been in trouble if he didn't, and that's really promising. Plus, putting him in with these guys now means that while he can experiment with his striking, he also has the idea that, okay, I can't be giving up free shots. I can't be arsing around on one leg like I was against, what was his name, Lee Taylor or something like that. The guy who was 1-1 with a 1-6 amateur record. Yeah, that was a bad fight. But Gallagher looked amazing here. Chinzo, I always said he's not going to go far because he doesn't have a grappling game and he's 40 years old already. But keep putting him on prelims or even main cards. He'll keep knocking guys out if you give him low-level guys or, guys with similar experience to him who aren't phenoms. And then another prospect who impressed me, certainly at the weigh-ins, another prospect who impressed me was Heather Hardy, who is like Bizarro Holly Holm. She's they are very Marvel-esque names, actually, aren't they? But she's a female boxer. She got into boxing at 28, which is partly says something about the female boxing you can get into a bit later. There's not guys. Well, there are people coming up like through the Olympic system and all that, but very encouraging that she came into boxing at 28 and after she had a kid, and she won 2 world titles in boxing. Not a very pretty boxing style on display in this fight, but she was making openings and landing through those openings, and that's what I like. That's all that matters. I mean, this is what I always talked about when I talked about Fedor. If you're hitting the guy and you're doing the damage and you're avoiding getting hit more than you are hitting him, you are doing something right. That's a method. There is no perfect method of boxing, obviously, because you're fighting someone. But she was hanging her head out there, waiting for the jab and looking to throw the cross counter over the top, the big loopy right hand. Beautiful stuff. Landed loads, did these weird little side steps to try and draw out more punches. Threw a couple of wide rights to the body, which I liked. Threw a lot of like sloppy, slow kicks that got caught and parried. But generally did a really good job. Her opponent wasn't anything special, but it was 4-5, so experienced at any rate. And she gave a really endearing post-fight speech, Heather Hardy. So she's one of my girls now, like her. I think this is the other side of that coin because Aaron Pico, he had so much hype behind him, and they put him in with a guy who had like 10 fights already. And the guy just overwhelmed him in the opening seconds. Because, that's the sort of stuff that's affected by jitters. I mean, or that being your first fight, you had to take a circle of the cage, you have to think, clear your head, or stop thinking even, and sort your breathing out, and then go to work later in the first round. Getting on him right off the bell was a great decision. Pico did run out and try to hit him right away. This is one of those things where everyone's now like, fuck that guy, that mega prospect that everyone was touting for ages. Doesn't really mean anything. I mean, one submission loss even, but he did get his bell rung. One loss is just a learning experience. It's when they start to add up that you want to start worrying about the guy. So overall, not a bad event. And then the UFC did their card on, was it Sunday? Yeah. Fight cards on Sundays are weird. Someone said the best thing that the UFC could do to undermine Bellator's card this weekend was to make Bader versus Davis 1 the free fight. Which, actually, the second fight turned out to basically just be a rerun of that fight, so they could have done that. But let's deal with the elephant in the room right away. Yes, a fighter did shit on the mat, which was pretty gross. Could be using something to get the water out during weight cut. Famously, like, guys end up basically squirting out liquid shits in the cage, or peeing themselves. You get that a lot too. Could just be that she had Felice Herrig trying to attack a body triangle for like 2 rounds. But I was really impressed with her name was Kish, I think. I was really impressed with her throughout this fight because she was outclassed on the ground, but she kept exploding into these escapes. She was just bridging and turning. And that's stuff that really tires you out, and she was doing it right up until the last minute of the fight, even with shit dribbling down her thigh. So, mad props to her. And props to Herrig, because she actually has really improved on a technical level in recent years. Grappling used to be her problem, and now she's actually taking it to people with that. But another women's fight, and another immediate back take by failed head and arm throw. I think that move should be used about a third as much as it is now in women's MMA. Like, just goes wrong so often. What else happened? There was a standing hammer fist KO. Pretty cool. Carlos Esparza picked up a win, which is nice. Clay Guida fought Eric Koch, or Koch, I can't remember his name. But do you remember when Eric Koch was due to fight Jose Aldo, and that seemed like the fight that we'd never see because they kept getting injured? Crazy how far things have moved on since then. But the real interesting moment of that fight was Clay Guida scorpion kicking Koch in the face from his head on his hips along the fence. I thought that was brilliant. Did it twice. Yeah, I just love seeing shit like that. You know, I'm always going to... And it scores with judges. People love that stuff. I was hearing about someone who was saying that... it was a Thai coach, and he was saying that... this was through Sylvia's stuff, obviously, because I don't speak Thai. No one does. But this was a guy who was talking about how he felt that more... techniques where you throw yourself off balance or you have to pick one leg up or something like that should be scored higher because they have that element of risk. Sort of like a bullfighter doing a fancy pass as opposed to like a basic pass. Yeah, I could understand that. So I think, yeah, give him points for those scorpion kicks. What else happened? Tim Means fought Alex Garcia. Yeah, that was an okay fight. Anytime Tim Means isn't elbowing a guy in the face by about 3 minutes in, I'm screaming at the TV that I've been falsely advertised to. I was like, I thought this was a Tim Means fight. Dominic Hayes blew Joachim Christensen out of the water. Lovely body kick, lovely straight down the centre. You know, that basic open guard double attack. Really liked it. And then Tim Boetsch blew out Johnny Hendricks. That was just sad. I'm actually a little bit worried about Johnny Hendricks now. Someone was saying that they reckoned he might have an eating disorder or something like that, and he could well because he's had a fall from grace, and it's all sorts of mental things go on inside your head when you've been a world champion and suddenly you're on a streak of losses, and people constantly making fun of you on the internet for your weight. And he looked like a fat guy in this fight. It was really weird because obviously at welterweight he was so fast. He's quite, he was a short, stocky guy and got across the floor so quickly. And in this, he just looked sluggish and chubby. It was really sad. And the Boetsch Jack Johnson style uppercuts to finish, really like those. He goes off to the side and throws him in like Jack Johnson. If you haven't seen the Jack Johnson episode, sign up to the Patreon, and we talk all about it, I'm pretty sure. If not, I'd wax lyrical about Jack Johnson's clinch fighting. Anyway, in fact, I've put up a free, a segment of it. The technical study, I always put that up free, and the lecture is just like for the Patreon boys. But yeah, go look at the Jack Johnson bit on the channel, and you'll see Jack Johnson throwing the same sort of uppercut from in close. And then Kevin Lee versus Michael Chiesa, controversial. Having watched it a few times, I could see why Mario Yamasaki did what he did. It's tough because as close, it doesn't matter if you believe that Kevin Lee was about to win. There was no submission and the guy wasn't unconscious. And the unconscious thing gets really murky the more you look into it because, a guy can appear to be unconscious and you can't really see his face because the other guy's on top of him, like Hirohiko Yoshida Ezekiel-ing Royce Gracie, and then Royce Gracie immediately jumps up and complains that it's too late, you've stopped the fight. And otherwise we do the pro wrestling thing where you lift the guy's arm up 3 times, and on number 3 he just stops it from dropping and starts to hulk up. But a bit tricky. I mean, I think Kevin Lee would have finished the choke. I think a few seconds later, Michael Chiesa would have gone out. But you can see Michael Chiesa's point because Michael Chiesa could say, the fight wasn't over. That was just the grappling equivalent of when I dropped him with that left hand earlier in the round. Anything could have happened from there. And there were only a few seconds left in the round. So who knows? If he had them bendo deep veins that Stephan Bonner was always on about on the commentary, maybe he could have survived it. It did look pretty much in and done though, but again, this is where we're saying but it was almost there, and this was always controversial with Sakuraba Hoyler as well, because Hoyler didn't tap, he was just grimacing, and the referee said technical submission, And the Gracies got very upset about that. But then the Gracies have played fast and loose with the submission rule before. Hickson had some of his chokeouts counted as TKOs. It's really strange. Anyway, they're talking about a rematch now, but I'd like to see Kevin Lee go on and fight some of the guys he's been calling out for a while, but everyone was laughing, and then they're like, oh, hang on, he beat the number whatever ranked lightweight in the world. He's one of my boys, Kevin Lee, and a regular listener of the show, so got to support him. But I feel for Michael Chiesa. It was a good fight up until then, and it looked to be on the way to a good decisive finish. Just a shame that Mario Yamasaki is still working. No, that's too cruel, actually. I did say I could see where he's coming from, but Dana went off on him after this immediately. So those were the fights that were. Let's do some questions. Dear Jack, what are some examples of fighters/grapplers that changed their styles dramatically due to injuries and improved their game, besides Cruz? I need some inspiration because my shoulder keeps falling out and I got surgery which left me stranded in Painland. Cheers, Kevin. Can relate, my shoulders are also jacked. Maybe not that badly, though. There's been a few, actually. Gene Tunney is a great example of a guy who was a bit of a banger, had brittle hands and moved towards a more jabby style. More modern example, Joe Calzaghe. He was known as a banger, and then, anyone who saw him in his later career was like, oh, what a slapper. But in his early days, he was like trying to knock people out with every punch. But hurting his hands made him a better fighter. He added an ultimometer? I don't know. He had a friend hook up his heavy bag so that it would keep track of how many punches he landed in a round. And he just set to work trying to land as many punches as possible. Really interesting guy if you look at his training methodology, because famously his dad had two boys. One of them wanted to learn to sing and one of them wanted to learn to box. And so Calzaghe taught himself singing and boxing from like any books he could find, and then taught them to do that. Got a trainer of the year actually at one point. I think he was training Macaronelli or someone like that. But their relationship was really sweet, Joe Calzaghe and his dad. But they got some interesting training methodologies. Like they say that they don't jump rope in the gym because they think that's a great way for guys to take breaks. Whereas another English gym, Ingalls place, all they do is rope work. They don't do as much road work. They do tons of jumping rope. But anyway, so he just basically adapted to using dozens and dozens of punches. He'd punch guys into a daze with just the sheer volume. And he got much better working the clinch and stuff like that too. If you watch him handle Jeff Lacey, he's using every grip in the book. He's using overhooks, he's using collar ties. It just dirty boxes Lacey up. On the other end, you got a guy like Muhammad Ali, whose legs, he had the fastest feet in the game when he was in his prime. When he came back, he was much slower. Guys like Jerry Quarry, Kenny Norton, Joe Frazier were able to catch him, put him to the ropes, or just make him look bad. So what he did was he started to dance around and then hold around. He'd just hold guys. And he started to use his power a lot more too. His hands weren't as fast as they were. He was blisteringly fast in his heyday. If you watch the footage of him in the Golden Gloves, it's the only time you'll actually see him using the Ali Shuffle to land punches. It's not just a gimmick. He's actually doing it and jumping in with the right straights. And he's throwing these punches that are really long, unpolished punches, but they're still getting in because he's so fast. But once his hands slowed down a bit, he started to hit with a bit more power. Like a great example is the fight with Oscar Bonavida. Can't remember his name. But like that was a completely forgettable fight until the final round, and then Ali just sort of bites down on his mouthpiece, starts landing check hooks as the guy walks in, and knocks him out going backwards. They say power's the last thing to go, but he could bang when he wanted to, Ali. He preferred to really flurry and get as many punches in as possible, but he sat down on his punches more as he got older. A couple of examples from the grappling world. Jeff Glover is the very famous one. He was like one of the top contenders in the world at his weight for a very long time. He's still, hanging around in the top end of any division he chooses to compete in, and he's still like cooking up a storm in grappling competitions, sub only and stuff like that. But he really nowadays he doesn't like hold on to guard as desperately and things like that. He got a lot of hand injuries from playing on the sleeves and things like that. if you watch his fight with, grappling match, people hate it when you say fight and you mean grappling match, but if you watch his match with Robson Moura, or Hobson Moura, at Abu Dhabi, I think it's 2011 maybe? I spoke about it the other week, but basically he uses his guard to frustrate Moura, and then shows him the body lock, and Moura jumps on him, immediately grabs his body and tries to keep hold of him, and Glover hips out and catches the guillotine, very wily dude, because it's catching a guillotine against good guys is a case of catching them with their out of position, and to do that sometimes you have to give a bit and to take a bit back. And of course he does the donkey guard and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, just a really interesting guy, and I think that he's really benefited from being like, okay, I've been injured, I've been beaten up, now I'll just play a style of jiu-jitsu that I enjoy and which still gets me submissions, or maybe gets me more submissions than if I were playing the standard meta that everyone else is. And then another example I put down here, but probably not as much to do with injuries, but Marcelo Garcia, his style changed so much over the years, and it really, he started off as a guy who just took the back. That was all he did. But then he went through a stage of just loving omoplatas, the crucifix, guillotines, and now he insists that his number one goal is getting to the back. But he'll, if you watch him roll, he can just take the guillotine from seemingly anywhere. So not as much to do with injuries, but more a guy just changing his style to keep ahead of people. But then with guys like Helzagi, it is an example of the injury forcing the guy to make changes, which maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe he'd have sat back. If he'd just been fighting like he did against Eubank, he never would have been the brilliant fighter that he was when he went against Lacey, Hopkins, Roy Jones and all that, Kessler. Yeah, interesting to think about. Cheers, Kevin. Hey, Jack, I was wondering, is the Tao of Jeet Kune Do worth a buy? I'm a beginner and I have only been training martial arts for a month or two, but I have been watching it for a year or two. I'm not sure if it will be useful or just fill my head with outdated techniques. Many thanks, Alex. Oh, going to piss off the Bruce Lee haters in the audience, and maybe some of the Bruce Lee fanboys. But no, Tao Jeet Kune Do I will always recommend as a solid book, because it's one guy's basically his training notes. So a lot of it is basically plagiarized, but I don't know if it was meant for publication. But famously, a lot of it is stuff that he put together while he was injured from doing good mornings with a bar loaded with his body weight on his back, which kind of stupid, but that was how he worked. He experimented with stuff, and he kept tons and tons of logs. And even if you don't think he was, if you don't think he was a special martial artist or anything like that, or you hate him because he didn't have any professional fights or whatever, you can respect that he did meticulously note take and he studied everything that he was really into. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I think you'd be hard pushed to say that his mindset wasn't in the right place. If you watch what guys like Ed Parker and stuff were doing at the same time as Bruce Lee was around, it is what he, that organized despair. I was watching some Ed Parker stuff this week, and it's just flailing your hands. And if the guy is demonstrating with you, he'll nicely fall over just the way you want him to and stuff. Bruce Lee actually had ideas that are much more in line with what we see as martial arts today. Some of it is outdated. Some of it maybe could come into vogue later on, like the low-line sidekick. That came into vogue well after we thought that was just something that wouldn't work. Yeah, I mean, get it, because his philosophical notes on the martial arts are really solid. His philosophical notes generally are worth a read, because it's all about Krishnamurti and I think it's mainly Krishnamurti that he was a big fan of. And the technical stuff isn't particularly advanced, but his routines and his training routines, if you followed him, you'll be knackered, because he was, he'd been doing them for years by this point, but they're definitely worth doing. Cheers, Alex. Best of luck. Hi, Jack. Historically, have there been any other any other ridiculously stupid fights that can rival Mayweather versus McGregor? Fights where a world-class fighter fights someone with no experience in the sport, or where two fighters from different disciplines fight in some weird mixed rules fast that makes them both look terrible. Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki springs to mind. But are there any other lesser-known examples? Cheers, Johnny. Yes, Muhammad Ali versus Inoki is one of the ones that everyone will give you, because that is the perfect example. Muhammad Ali signed up to fight this pro wrestler, but he didn't know, he clearly hadn't heard the rules or taken it seriously. So they got there and they said, okay, shit, well, he's not allowed to grapple or will walk. So Inoki just slides across the ring with kicks. If you want to read more about it, my boy Josh Gross wrote a book called Ali vs. Inoki, the forgotten fight that inspired mixed martial arts and launched sports entertainment. He sent me an early copy of that and I loved it. Definitely worth reading. Because Inoki himself had been doing all sorts of mixed rules fights before that. And Ali loved like pro wrestling and things like that. He got his whole shtick from Gorgeous George. Very famously said they hated Gorgeous George. They wanted him beat, but they've paid $50 for ringside seats. I remember that because I put it in Notorious. But trying to think of some other examples. Jack Johnson fought a wrestler. I believe John L. Sullivan fought a wrestler at some point. There were all sorts of wrestler versus boxer matches in Japan and wrestler versus jiu-jitsu / karate. Choki Motobu's fight with the boxer is one that's always brought up. Choki Motobu was a Okinawan guy from the age of like secretive karate, and he stole lessons basically by looking through a fence. And he went out and tested his shit, in an era of karate nisente, whatever it is. There is no first hand in karate. He was out there starting street fights. And he was like the polar opposite to Gichin Funakoshi, who didn't fight and was a school teacher and was like 4'10", and then went to the mainland of Japan and became like the most successful teacher of karate ever. And Choki Motobu went to Japan and was in the same city in Tokyo, and he loathed Funakoshi. When the boxer versus karate fight thing happened, Motobu allegedly knocked out this boxer, and then in the newspaper the next day, the guy who drew the illustrations drew Gichin Funakoshi as the karate guy. So it was all very tense. But I think it was fighting Harada. Some famous Japanese boxer went to work with Motobu after he retired, which is an interesting story. But we're getting into different stuff now. Trying to think of other stupid rules fights. George Hackenschmidt versus Frank Gotch is a very famous one, but that was a wrestling match between like an experienced wrestler / world's strongest man and the best wrestler in the world. So it had that freak show element, but Hackenschmidt was an accomplished wrestler. But they supposedly went for like an hour or something, and Gotch fouled him all sorts to try and get ahead, punched him in the nose at one point, and all sorts of other stuff. Fascinating story. If you can read, well, there's accounts of both sides, so give both of those a read and decide which one you believe. I will say that the more I do on old school, the more I research these old school martial artists and boxers, the more I find that they did do these stupid gimmicky matches. So stay tuned, and I'll hopefully have some more for that soon. Cheers, Johnny. Hi, Jack. My question is McGregor versus Mayweather. I'm just fucking with you. Okay, good. I didn't vet this question, and I was regretting it then. My question is, who you consider to be best in the world as a striking / grappling / MMA coach? There seems to be a sea of world-class coaches now, since MMA has now evolved despite lack in certain areas. Coaches like Faras, Mark Henry, Henry Hooft, Bang Ludwig, Jack Wink, Jackson Winklejohn, Mike Brown, etc., and of course Danaher, Bravo, Gracie's, etc. Is it best to learn from all coaches or stick with one? Kind regards, Dylan. As a cheeky extra, do you plan on bringing other people onto your podcast from the MMA world? Yeah, I'll address that now. Actually, yeah, maybe. I haven't decided. I thought it might be fun to do an interview with someone because, I have good relationships with a good few fighters and press members and coaches now. I've just never really called on them for favors, but one day I might. I'll see if I can do some like sit down interviews with some guys, or Skype them or whatever. Put that on the maybe pile. We'll see if that goes. Actually, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll think about it. I mean, I don't consider myself a journalist, so I don't really like to jump into that pool and try and do things that other guys are probably doing better. But if you're interested, I'll ask them the questions that I'm interested in, but maybe not everyone else is. Anyway, back to your question, Dylan. I think the strange thing about fighting generally is that in addition to natural talent, you're dealing with relationships too. Chemistry between a fighter and a coach is an enormous factor. I mean, TJ Dillashaw is a brilliant example. Him and Bang Ludwig, they got together and they just clicked. And that's not to say anything bad about Buckles. Can't remember his first name. But yeah, the striking coach down at Alpha Male. That's not to say anything bad about the other guys at Alpha Male. But sometimes someone can explain to you something, over and over and over again. Someone else comes in for a seminar, says exactly the same thing in a different way, and it'll just click. And you'll find that over and over again in martial arts. So there's all this like kidology and psychology linked with it, and the chemistry between a coach and his charge. I also think that no matter how rounded a coach is and how good an understanding he has of all the facets of the game, he'll be able to prepare a fighter better in certain styles than he would others. Rafael Cordero obviously trains his guys up to be very aggressive and get in his opponent's faces and use that body kick wonderfully. But his guys are typically more like defensively porous. Rafael Dos Anjos is the exception to that, but he did a load of training at Evolve. And his style just looked a little bit like, it was very much like that standard Cordero gym style in a lot of ways, but it was also different in a lot of ways. And then it came out better as a result for him. And again, some guys respond well to being in a lion's den. And just being surrounded by killers every day, and with what's considered a world-class camp. Other guys get more out of training on their own. Max Holloway trains in the middle of nowhere with no one famous, but his coaches and him have this amazing relationship where he comes in with special things that he's been working on for the fight, for that opponent, and he almost always has them sussed out. And maybe that's an advantage of being the big fish in the small pond. The coaches have the time to devote to your fight, your big fight. Whereas maybe, I'll use Jackson Wink as an example because I know that they've got hundreds of top class fighters there. But maybe at Jackson Wink it's a little bit harder to get as many eyes and as much time on studying for one particular fighter. Because you're in that lion's den and there's dozens of guys who, even if you're like going for a King of the Cage title or something like that, something that would be a big deal to a lot of gyms, you're always going to be in the same gym as guys who are going for UFC titles, and maybe they take preference or something like that. So again, it's all about environment, and you can't tell where people are going to thrive and where people are going to struggle. It's sometimes camps, because obviously if camps consistently have amazing results, they're doing something right. But you can take a guy who's an also-ran at one of those big camps, put him in a different camp, might even be another big camp, and suddenly he'll make strides that he wasn't making before. I think I'm a big proponent of mixing things up. If things get stagnant, it's seen as like the last resort of a fighter. You are struggling, you've had a couple of losses, so you change weight class or you change camp. But I think changing camp is generally a good idea. Actually, I didn't mention BJ Penn, but I've been like, please retire BJ Penn for a long time. But seeing him in against Dennis Siver, I saw things in him. He was struggling with the kicks still, and he is slower. But I saw things in him that weren't there before. Back in the day when he was just like, I don't have to check kicks, I don't have to deal with kicks. And against Siver, he was actually trying to deal with them and actually put in body work to try and slow, stop Siver picking up his legs. He's checking some kicks, even though he's in that side-on stance and struggling. It makes you wonder if he'd got away from like his yes men sooner. He was another one who trained basically on his own and had guys around him who he could just whoop on, and they'd be like, "Well done, BJ." Maybe if he'd got in with like Jackson Wink or TriStar or one of those gyms full of guys who aren't going to be like yes men and are going to be in your face day after day, maybe he'd have turned out or started to develop that stuff sooner. Yeah, so I realise I haven't given you like an answer to best coaches for various things, but it's tricky. Like, because if I could, I would love to train with Marcelo Garcia for my grappling, and then I'd go to Wildcard for my boxing, and it's just not possible. And of course, like, there are guys like Faraz is a great example, or any of these top coaches in modern MMA. They're going to be able to teach you to blend stuff much better than if you're out like a Ronin training in various places in the single disciplines. Half the stuff that you'll learn in a boxing gym is irrelevant to MMA because of the stance difference, and half the stuff you learn in a traditional kickboxing gym or a Muay Thai gym is irrelevant to MMA because of the wrestling. It's a different sport, and as much as many guys build themselves up like, I'll get the best help I can in each aspect of it, bringing it all together is really the art form, and that's the common factor that the top coaches in the world all have. They have that ability to say, okay, that won't work for our purposes, we'll do this. So yeah, sorry, so no list of top 10 coaches there, but some musings on what makes the difference to each person on their coaches, because I could work with Coach X and Coach Y, and Coach X could be Coach of the Year 3 years running. Coach Y could be some guy down the road, but maybe Coach Y, something about him just makes it click for me, or maybe he had a career in the ring, and his style is more suited to me than what I would be working on with Coach X. There's no neat answers, and that's the interesting thing about fighting. You can always say, like, how good would Tyson have been if he hadn't met Cus D'Amato, if he'd met someone else, or whatever? Anyway, that's enough on that question. Cheers. Right, what we got next week? Michael Johnson versus Justin Gaethje. I am so hyped for that. Michael Johnson with the lovely straight punches and the low kicks. Justin Gaethje with the right uppercut and the counter right low kick. And the getting hit in the face a lot. Uses a lot of like fake shots into uppercuts. He hits always like he wants to take someone's head off. But Michael Johnson, probably the sharper striker. Very interested to see how that works out. But Justin Gaethje's been doing a great job for himself, because while everyone, he has been getting the hype of like the guy from outside that we always do. But where like Eddie Alvarez or Will Brooks or someone like that comes in, and if they lose one, it's suddenly like, oh, overrated, blah, blah, blah. Gaethje's done a great job of just being like, I'm going to try my best, and either I'll look stupid doing it or I'll knock everyone out. And everyone sort of respects that style of like, yeah, I'm going in to knock out or get knocked out. And he's one of those few fighters that I can actually believe it when he says it. The guy's a wild man. And he's supposed to have terrible eyes too. Like, if you ever see him at the press conference, he's got these like bulletproof lenses on. So he could be like Joe Frazier, just feeling his way to the punches. Elsewhere on that card, you've got Jared Cannonier, who I am always singing the praises of because he boxed up Glover Teixeira while working 10 hours in the airport every day and training in the middle of nowhere with no one. Then you got Elias Theodorou, who's my boy, whose name I'm probably still saying wrong, but he does have marvellous hair. He's fighting Brad Tavares, who I remember having great takedown defense, but he's had a couple of losses lately. Gray Maynard versus Teruto Ishihara. Maynard got booked quicker than my boy Ryan Hall, even though my boy Ryan Hall kept stepping on his face. Not too pleased with that. And then Teruto Ishihara he's lost the crest of his meme momentum, but maybe he can get taken seriously as a fighter more after this fight, because Maynard's chin is deteriorated a fair bit. But then Ishihara, I don't know how well he does work with Team Alpha Male all the time, so his counter wrestling is probably pretty good. Mark Jacasey is on the card. Jessica Ai is on the card. Angela Hill, who is coming off that awesome fight with Jessica Andrade. That's someone whose record doesn't really, like, if you saw that record 6-3-0, you'd be like, okay, that's some newbie or some up and comer. But she's had some great fights in that very short career. Ed Herman, CB Dollaway. God, CB Dollaway's jerking the curtain. Weird how things go by and you get old and ultimately die. So on that note, I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon. We're going to be doing... I think I've changed the focus now. It's not going to be just Sakuraba and the Pride 2000 Grand Prix. I actually want to do like a sort of focus on all the members of the 2000 Grand Prix because it is so good. and was such an important event in MMA history. Obviously, huge amount of Sakuraba in there, but you've got Igor, you've got Hoist, you've got Mark Kerr, which is a very tragic and interesting story on its own. You've got Mark Coleman in the comeback story. Can't talk too much more because you might not have seen Pride 2000 Grand Prix, and I'll be giving you spoilers. But knees to the head on the ground, that's the secret. Anyway, I'll catch you next week. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Connor bless.